And not just succeeding at it, but succeeding at it in such a way that impacts millions of people around them. That's change leadership. That's change leadership which is impacting not just your company for profits, but in a wider sense.
Ms. Karnik, as a jury member looking at these companies, what was the criteria in actually selecting the winners?
It's a rapidly changing world, and what we were looking at was people who were companies, individuals who best led the change, not just managed but led it, and we also looked at situations that they were able to engender which created the maximum impact. I'm indeed pleased that there were so many. Frankly, it was a very difficult job because there were so many examples, and sometimes we had a lot of discussion, this versus that, because they were so close and there were so exciting things that were happening here. And one of the great things is the amount of stuff that's happening in the country in terms of really creating something, and the people who are able to manage this change and lead it, whether it's a mega corporate merger like the Tata Chorus one, or it's a very grassroots innovation where you're changing something dramatically in a small way, but that creates a phenomenal impact.
I think the Corporate Affairs Ministry must be the most action-packed, Mr. Khushi. There's so much happening because, you have Indian companies going abroad, you have a global crisis which is spreading, nobody knows where. And of course, Indian companies, are all, bursting through the seams, growing now. So from your standpoint, what is it looking like?
Yes, I think this is an exciting time to be in corporate affairs. We have a lot of work to do. We have an old company law. We've tried to patch it up many times, etc. in the last 20 years. We now need a new law because if we say the attitudes have changed, they must be reflected in the law as well. Hopefully, before the end of the year, we will have that new law. It's now before Parliamentary Standing Committee.
Curtis, is it pretty much a thinking that's going through every developing country? Because, you're leapfrogging, you're not, the incremental growth that was a norm in the past has been replaced by huge leap forwards and in a globally, very, very fast changing scenario. So how have other developing countries dealt with this?
I think it's more than just fast changing, it's almost revolutionary type of change that's taking place, and we're seeing that all over the world with clients that we work with. And I think people are learning as they go. One of the ideas from the Who Moved My Cheese story that we use is that you need to experiment and learn what does or doesn't work and adapt very quickly. And so as we work with organizations, that's exactly what we teach: to test, to experiment, to learn, and then modify so you can come up with the best solution or the best change as efficiently as possible.
Kumar, when you deal with companies on the ground, are they confused at this stage with what's happening around? And do you think, a lot of hand-holding is required there?
I wouldn't say confusion, but clearly, it's not like 5 or 10 years ago when you said, if I'm in, let's say, cement or steel, I'm going to, forecast for 5 or 7 or 10 years and say this is what, capacity is going to look like and demand is going to look like and tariffs are going to be, or, the coal prices or fuel prices are going to be. So there's external volatility, and if you see in the last 3 years, that is hampering, management, middle management, all kinds of planning process, budgeting, massively. And people are now realizing that, hey, growth itself is a big change. The waters are murkier than ever before. And companies need to be more agile. They need to be, like for example, in the Mahindra Satyam case, I think what is phenomenal is it was actually a crisis management case study in a way. But in a typical crisis management situation, what you do is you sew up, the victim in a hurry. It's usually not a long-lasting solution. But here, the administration, the people involved, they actually came up with a quick solution, but it was permanent.
From the government standpoint, how are you viewing that? Because that's perhaps the uncertainty is the most difficult thing about adapting to change.
Well, in a sense, the good thing is that we have a natural buffer, and we've done well right through every crisis because it comes to the shore, it rumbles a little bit, but it doesn't get in. We seem to have a natural buffer, but that's a buffer that you can't depend upon all the time, because we are integrating very fast. We are getting a footprint across.
Ms. Karnik, you've headed NASSCOM. You also have seen how IT companies have shifted towards Europe because of the slowdown in the US. I mean, are you a little worried about when you see what's happening in Europe, and what could the collateral damage be for us?
Well, concerned, sure. I think everybody in the industry is concerned because Europe is a big market and potentially very large. But for some years now, the industry has very consciously looked beyond the traditional markets. We've looked at Japan, at Africa, at South America, and Indian companies have forayed there and gone out. And I think this provides an impetus to them. And I see that, in fact, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity in many ways for India. It's an opportunity to get driven into other markets which we have been a bit lazy about exploring. It's an opportunity to see what you can do by way of acquiring companies where valuations are now coming down. It's a great opportunity to pick up talent around the world. And I think both companies and the government should work together to say, hey, this is the time, just as you want to go and acquire companies, go and acquire talent, which is in many ways more precious than a company.
Curtis, is there a tendency for corporations to clamp up in the face of such uncertainty, especially when you're taking your first steps, going international, going and acquiring companies, expanding geographical spreads, etc.?
Well, there certainly can be that tendency. It comes back to the idea around organizations, whether or not they have a propensity for change and the skill at change. And if they don't, they'll clamp up. So hopefully, organizations are developing a capability around change that lets them behave differently than that.
And how are Indian companies equipping themselves to that? I mean, from what you see and when you interact with them.
I think I see a change in the last 1 year itself. Going back to my earlier point, people have now started realizing that this is a discipline by itself. So surely IT companies already have a change management discipline very firmly entrenched. But other sectors as well, they need to realize that it's not going to be about making steel at the lowest possible cost. You need to be agile, you need to be reacting to market volatility, to geopolitical risk, to what have you. And they're gearing their people towards it. But it's not going to happen very quickly. A, the numbers are too large, and two, these are not technical skills which you can teach, through tele-distance education, let's say. This is attitudinal change, this is behavioral change, and it's going to take a long time.
Ms. Khurshid, one question on Europe and the fact that in the last phase of corporate expansion, many Indian companies actually went and acquired companies in Eastern Europe and parts of, the developed part of Europe. Are you concerned a little about what's happening out there and what it could mean for them?
Of course, and I think some of those investments were backfired when the first crisis came in Europe, and obviously that was a setback. So I think very careful balancing will have to be done by them, and of course we are here to help in any way possible, but there is very limited assistance that we can provide in this situation, except in terms of backup policies and so on, as we did here at home in terms of the support that the finance minister was able to give. So I would say yes, it is a worry, it's a concern, and we would obviously keep it in watch.
But how serious is the crisis right now, as you see it in Europe? If the euro was to break up, I mean, have you had deliberations around that? What happens then to Indian companies out?
Some of the things that have been reported and said are very alarming. The attitude that France was taking, for instance, are very alarming. There is a comfort level in our being able to work with Europe as it's emerged in the European Union. And if that's going to fall apart, even in certain aspects is going to fall apart, there'll be a lot of adjustment that will have to be done by India. So it's obviously something that's of a great deal of concern. But I have faith in Europe. I think they will come out of it.
We've had IMF monies come in, the whole Eurozone come in with a kitty, etc. At the end of the day, do you think at this stage in the entire recovery process, the fact that we are so vulnerable will get a crisis covered because everybody will come in, and is that going to be the trend going forward?
I think yes. If my understanding is right, people have today in the world understood that you cannot envisage a future without India. China's had it for a while, and I think we've now found a place at the high table, and nobody's going to ask us that, look, sorry, but there isn't enough food going around. I think that people are going to factor India into whatever they are doing, and we can't now have a setback, because I think our sights are set on something very, very big, both in international organizations, the UN, and also the economic setup.
Well, change is happening fast, and that's why a leadership award like this is important, because it's one step ahead of change. But Ms. Karak, what would your advice be, since you've sat on many boards and you've looked so closely at industry? Should politics actually take a leaf out of what corporates do?
No, that's a very popular thing to say, but I think frankly, there's a lot that corporates can learn from politics. Very seriously, I mean it. I mean, the way parties manage themselves, the way they get down to grassroots and get a sense of what is there. I'm not suggesting that corporates go to grassroots in that sense. I'm saying that for equal for the corporate with the customer. And it's only now that this understanding that listen to the customer, co-create, as Prahlad and others have said, is beginning to happen in corporates. The politicians have been doing it for ages. So I think we need to also, I mean, it's a two-way flow. There's, yes, a great deal, obviously, that politicians can learn from corporates. But this idea of a CEO, corporate thing, I don't buy that. I think there's a great deal more to politicians and politics at the grassroots level, an understanding of compromises, of coalitions.
And in a country like India, with so many diverse pools and pressures.
I think it's a two-way flow.
Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.